Welcome to our International Men's Day chat on male suicide prevention and mental health. My name is Josh Rivedal, and this is Dr. Max McKay-James. We're here in London, in the UK. In case you can't hear my accent, I'm not from here. I'm from the US. I'm an author, international speaker on suicide prevention, mental health, and wellness. I lost my grandfather in the late 1960s to suicide. He served in the Royal Air Force. He suffered from some post-traumatic stress. My father was an American man, lived in the US, took his life in 2009, unfortunately, and I nearly took my life in 2011. And after getting help, I decided I'm going to use my creative talents to write a book called The Gospel According to Josh and a play of the same name. And so Max and I are here today doing not just this book launch, because Dr. Max wrote a foreword to this Gospel According to Josh book on behalf of his organizations, Men Beyond 50 and Conscious Aging Trust. But we're here talking today to dispel some myths about male suicide prevention, male suicide, mental health and wellness, and things of that nature, and just to have a very frank and open and honest conversation. So I'll let Dr. Max talk about his work and his personal story as well for a few moments.
Thank you, Josh. I'm Max, and I'm a doctor, GP doctor by background. But actually, where I started is I'm also grieved by suicide. My grandfather committed suicide, so Josh and I kind of parallel there. And my brother committed suicide, and the parallel there that he wasn't too different from the age Josh is now, and his dad isn't too different from my age. So it's kind of this connection across the USA and the UK, a younger man and an older man. And about my story, as I decided to take off my white coat, and I ran a charity, as Josh has said, called Conscious Aging Trust. And the focus of that is about our aging and dying and caring and loss. And for older men in particular, a focus on some of the issues that arise around social isolation and loneliness, and how that impacts, particularly now we're in November, about men's mental health, and particularly today, about suicide awareness and prevention.
Fantastic. To begin our conversation, what does someone thinking about suicide, a man, what does he kind of look like? Because there are some signs and some symptoms and things like that.
Absolutely. Well, low mood can come into it. You know, in my case, after my brother died, I was incredibly depressed for really all of my 20s. I was only 21 when he died, and I looked down the end of a bottle of booze for a lot as well. And so alcohol can be a mask. It can be a kind of a prop. And I'm not saying that all alcoholics are suicidal, but alcohol can go with mental illness and stuff like depression. And then sort of social isolation can be part of the story, which is what I said a bit before, because a lot of men are living on their own, and there's a lot of loneliness among older men and younger men too. But and then maybe a reluctance to name things, a difficulty to kind of connect with what our feeling lives are about. So we feel a crisis, we can't put our fingers on it. And I guess the last thing that comes to mind is a sense of my life's a failure, maybe, you know, particularly for older men, but I think it's for younger men as they're trying to mature, reach into adult life. Sense, what is my purpose? Or a big catastrophe comes along, I lose my job, or I lose my marriage, you know, and these things can accumulate. And the wisdom of Josh's book is that it's a kind of like a weather system. It's a whole constellation of stuff that gets together and winds itself up into a crisis. And suicide is a crisis moment or passage of time that is like a storm.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, the storm thing, because it was a very, for me certainly. I mean, a lot of those things that you mentioned, I mean, I was feeling that in my storm, and it was a long storm, and it sort of petered out after about 9 months with some work and, you know, with a bunch of umbrellas, and so to speak. But there was the isolation. You know, I didn't want to talk about my stuff. because, you know, people are gonna think I'm crazy or weird or stupid, or I'm not gonna get a date again, or, you know, and that was far from the truth. I'm gonna have a lovely girlfriend, and I've gotten a date again. But you know, but there was all this stigma around it, but the truth of the matter is, when I started talking about my stuff, what was going on, the fact that I was thinking about dying, the fact that I felt worthless, was the moment that things actually started to get better, because then I could sort of figure you know, have other people help myself figure a way out of this. I was losing some sleep. I lost my appetite, and I wasn't enjoying the things that I once did. So it's a very, very common thing. And just as a quick sort of kicker to the end of that, because I serve on both sides, you know, losing someone to suicide, and then also having been suicidal. After my father's death, we as a family were sort of like, well, if we only saw it coming. And then a couple years later, we see that there are signs and some symptoms. And so there was a little bit of guilt that we felt. We're like, well, we should have been more vigilant. We should have understood. But the fact of the matter is, you don't know what you don't know. You know, and if you don't have the information, then you don't have it. But we have it now. There's some great things up on the Samaritans website. There's great stuff on the U.S. website, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline website. And so they have some signs and symptoms. And so what I can do is take that information going forward and use that to help other people. But I can't do anything about the past. The next question, Dr. Max, is how can someone get help? Because we talked about the signs and the symptoms and things like that, but how can someone get help? What does that look like? How can they reach out?
Well, the first step is kind of what we're already doing, which is right here and now. We're talking about it and normalizing that this is an acceptable topic of conversation. I kind of, as you were talking there, Josh, I was thinking of the difference between you as a younger man and me as an older man. It was even harder, and still is very hard for older men, perhaps, to find the language. So it's not just about the information, it's about finding the language that can encompass, I know I'm feeling badly, but, oh, it might be depression. You know, do I get depression as an older man? So, you know, recognizing that some of these symptoms, like lack of sleep, unable to go to sleep, or feeling very tearful and stuff, you know, it's okay. We don't have to put the D word around it, but it's okay if that's what we find us doing. So finding that language, if we can reach out to that. Now, the other thing that I find is came up very quickly for me in my 20s when I was feeling depressed, was a sense of shame. I kind of thought, this is not the kind of man I ought to be. And I think when you can talk to other men who can recognize that shame and just say, yep, I have those feelings from time to time too, because it's a natural feeling. And this is where I kind of catch up into maybe a difference between generations, where perhaps us older men have that more embedded in our kind of inheritance from our fathers and grandfathers. And I really love the way you younger guys are kind of freeing us, helping not only to free yourselves, but also free older men from the stigma of silence, the feeling that it's shameful to speak about these things. So maybe what I want to be saying, we're talking and we're beginning to talk to each other, and that doesn't actually will not do any harm. If you're having suicidal thoughts, one of the myths we need to deal with is that that if you talked about it, it could make it worse, it could make it happen. And it ain't so. It ain't so. It's not. It's gonna help to release the pressure and begin to share it, and then you know, from that one conversation with somebody who might be a friend or just an oblique acquaintance. It doesn't necessarily have to be an intimate or a member of your family, and it certainly doesn't necessarily have to be a healthcare professional, or although they're magnificent at what the kind of on-help lines can do. That can be a lifeline, because sometimes it's too scary to pick up the phone. Maybe it's the other way around, and picking up the phone is what you can do because you got the anonymity. Thank you. And then take it one step at a time.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh, I think you touched on a lot of great things. you can reach out to people beyond the healthcare community. Although I say in order, I reached out to my mom first, and we certainly didn't have a good relationship at the time, and so I definitely took a risk there. But I needed to talk to somebody because I knew just before kind of nearly making an attempt, I knew that I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to feel the way that I did, and I'd been sort of in that black pit for about 6 weeks, and even 9 months until I felt better again completely. I would say, or almost entirely. But I knew that I didn't want to die. I just didn't want to feel in that emotional pain anymore. So I needed to talk to somebody. So I reached out to my mom, and so from there, she asked me, and this ties into exactly what you just said, Max, and that is, she asked me on the phone, "Are you thinking about suicide?" She said the S word, and that was important for me because nobody had ever asked me that question while I was going through this, because it's a scary thing. You think it's a scary thing, and there's that myth that you say, well, if I ask somebody about it, it's going to make them do it, and they answer it, and that is definitely not true. My mom asked me the question, and it didn't make me do it at all. It was a gauge, and it was a meter to see how strongly I was thinking about it, if I was thinking about it, and that's the case. That holds true in every case. And the second thing was it showed that my mom was a friend, and that she actually, could push through sort of the fear to make sure that her kid was all right, her son was all right. And, if you're with a friend, a pal, or anybody, that's a great place to be. And then, folks who you can reach out to, it could be your GP, it could be a general practitioner, it could be a psychologist, it could be a mentor, it could be a clergy person. But the most important thing is that you talk. And also that you sit there, if you're the person on the other side listening to the person in crisis, that you sit there and you be with them and you listen to them, and really no advice other than finding a way to get them to professional help, because we all have different brains and we all want to fix, and that's a beautiful thing. That's human, and I think that's wonderful. But the way that I think about things and fix things is different than the way Max thinks about things and fixes things. And so, if I'm in crisis and Max gives me a piece of advice because he wants to fix, but that piece is not working, I'm going to shut down because my thinking isn't clear. And so it's really, really important that, if Max is sitting with me while I'm in crisis, he sits there and listens and just kind of, and we can do a lot of nonverbal things. We can sit by the barbecue and roast some meat and grunt over it, or we can, fix the car or watch television, but just being there with somebody, guys, girls, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to put a couple of resources of help on the screen. This is on gospeljosh.com/UK. And there's a bit of resources on the left-hand side that you can click to. It's free. I won't know that you came, but these are just a few helplines, depression support. There's some information on the right-hand side about conscious aging and men beyond 50 if you go to that portion of the website. You got stuff all over the UK, Scotland, Northern Ireland. Wales has some stuff as well. Now, Max, you talked about briefly before, about myths. It seems like there's more than a few myths surrounding this issue of suicide. Can you speak to that a little bit further on anything that comes to mind or anything that you've taken note of?
Yeah, I'm going to put my glasses on here because there's the WHO, the World Health Organization, just a couple of months ago, issued a report on world suicide, and kind of its key kind of lead thing was one suicide happens every 40 seconds. Extraordinary. And something like 880,000 suicides are happening every year. So like they were looking at this as a global major cause of death, early death, of course, for us, and putting it away from just the UK or USA into a global thing. And they came up, you can look it up online. Suicide comes out of the blue. It doesn't come out of the blue. It comes out of a whole set of circumstances. So we've done that. And that's kind of reassuring, because it's the kind of way that it also ends by slowly unpicking the various elements that are leading to this suicidal behavior, this kind of awful feeling that I have to get out of. So let's do the angle that says because you're suicidal, you're a bit crazy. That it's a sign of mental illness, and it isn't. The bad feeling, the horrible feeling, is a horrible feeling, and it's the sense of despair. And despair is not a mental illness. It's something that you and I share. And kind of as you were talking earlier, Josh, what I wanted to say was, I'm here with you, and people might say, oh, well, he looks responsible. He looks like he's an expert. And one of the things I like to do with through the charity is to kind of de-expert ourselves, that we're there in this suicidal area because it's something we can all touch on. I've rarely met a man or a woman who has not expressed a suicidal feeling in their lives. And some of them are strong, some of them are fleeting, some of them are persistent, some of them are reactive, and some of them have connection to a mental illness like depression. So clearly, if I am feeling regularly depressed with the signs and symptoms of depression, which are poor sleep, low mood, of course, low libido, no sex drive, recognizing that depression and mental illness is a factor or a way that the storm builds is important, but it's not like that suicide itself is an illness.
Well, right, and I think just to sort of reiterate and maybe distill or to just add another angle to that, exactly, not every suicide is connected to a mental illness, and it's not mutually exclusive. Like if you're dealing with a mental health condition, it doesn't mean you're going to ever be suicidal, and vice versa. If you're suicidal, doesn't mean you have a mental health condition. For instance, going through my suicidal depression and suicidal thoughts, I think it was very much situational. There's a good chance that I might have a bit of depression running through the family, but nevertheless, I don't think mine is strong enough. I don't know. We have never been diagnosed. Nevertheless, there was a lot of change happening at the same time. Lost my father, was going through a bad thing with my mom. Girlfriend of 6 years broke up with me. Wasn't paying attention to my physical health or my mental health for that matter, even though I didn't have that vocabulary. And so it was all this change at once. It was all this nasty storm of just a whole bunch of things all at once. It wasn't connected to a mental illness, and I had this feeling of despair. And so as long as it took to go in, I had to put the work, the interesting work, the good work over 9 months to really come out of that. And so there's no magic pill, there's no magic 3 sessions of therapy and then you're out. But it doesn't mean you're crazy if you're thinking that. And I thought that I was crazy at the time, and I certainly wasn't. And it took me a little while to understand that, and that I was worthwhile and was a worthy human being, and that crazy is just something that mankind has invented to quantify, put down. And I've never met anyone who's crazy. People just need help.
Beautifully put, actually. I mean, that you've covered a huge amount of that, the kind of quality of the territory and how it feels to be inside. I think the one thing I'd add is the experience that the world is kind of shutting down a bit. Yeah. You know, the walls are drawing in, a sense of isolation that is really scary, but also difficult to feel the way out of. And that kind of feeds the despair. But it's also the kind of sense that we can, when we were talking about that initial point of contact, you were in a way able to pick up the phone. You weren't able to say, hey mom, I'm feeling suicidal. Your mom kind of picked that up, which is an incredible gift, that she had that leap, that she could go forward and say and ask that. But you know, when I was feeling really dark in my 20s, I wouldn't have been able to pick up this phone and say, hey Josh, I'm suicidal, but I'd maybe be able to talk about some of the stuff that was going on, like saying, I've got no mojo, you know, I've got no energy, I'm feeling, I don't want to go out, you know, and maybe a good friend would have said, look, is there something more going on? Mm-hmm. You know, and that's the way these normal kind of everyday conversations, without either of us having to be experts or reveal or know what we're kind of talking about, become ways that we kind of bridge into the conversation, and then one thing leads to another. Yeah. I think
this idea that you don't need to be an expert is brilliant. You certainly, at some point, people need a little bit of extra help, whether it's with clergy or a mentor or even like professional like a professional psychologist, which I have seen and do see, and I think was one of the best decisions I made to do that. It was a blank slate and someone who would let me help myself become a better person. But you don't need to initially to be with someone, to sit with them, to listen to them, to talk to them, to help them. You don't need to be a professional. You don't need to have a special degree or anything like that. You can be a human being. My mother, no special letters behind her name. She's just a lady, a normal person. I got another question for the good doctor. Yeah. Because it is possible to get away from these suicidal thoughts, and it might be more difficult. They might still be reoccurring in the beginning as you're sort of coming out of it, as I can speak from experience. But what does recovery look like? Moving away from suicidal thoughts.
Well, I think the myth to kind of key in on that is that like with your experience, is that suicidal behavior or sense that I want to take my life is an episode. It's not going to last. And one of the myths that can feel awful in despair is the sense that this is forever. And when we're in it, it's a sense of that sense is even strengthened because we lose a kind of sense of time or any life direction and so on. So how do when you start to think about that around the other way? So what are going to be the ways that you or I may start to find a thread or several threads out, and life direction would mean possibly very simple, low-scale steps to begin with. So, okay, I'm going to socialize a little more. I haven't been to the pub for weeks, so I'm going to go and have a drink and just sit there and be in the company of other men or women, whatever. I'm going to take a little more exercise. I'm going to walk a bit further. So nothing like, it's not like a direct kind of route out, but it's a certain quality of engagement and beginning to take small steps that are realistic, that aren't kind of, okay, well, I've got to change my life, I've got to find a new partner, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to get a job, which is kind of just deepen the despair. It's kind of those little things, and I'm feeling myself wanting to be very tender about this bit. It's not like I want us to be He-Man, because I think some of this whole preponderance of suicide in men as opposed to women is because of masculinity modeling. But our generation, I think, has got it stronger than you guys, and it's kind of a privilege that you and I can talk about this in the same place and begin to put that to rest and feel that actually men's vulnerability is common to, it's gender neutral, frankly. It's just what we all naturally have that preference to feeling a bit vulnerable. And if we have a voice message inside our heads saying, you got to be strong, you got to be strong, you got to be a man, all that kind of stuff, it's kind of, oh, let's get rid of that. So meeting people who have a certain quality of softness, is just, oh, what a relief. You don't have to talk. Maybe you didn't want to talk about suicide at all, or in any sense mention some of the shadow spaces inside to begin with. But you just feel it's a relief not to be in a world where everything is screwed up and tight.
Get you out of your sort of the swirling thinking of negative thoughts and things like that. I mean, I think, going out and being with people, that was one of my saving graces when I was going through that. And I didn't talk about suicide and depression with all those people. There wasn't many of them because I wasn't necessarily comfortable getting out there and just sort of being in the world. I still kind of wanted to isolate, but I knew that I needed to be with people. But being with family and being with friends, the good ones, and just sort of being out there, I mean, it was sort of even in the beginning, it's a temporary relief of knowing that there is good in the world and knowing that people care about me and I matter. And I sort of had to force myself, because I didn't even know if I believed that in the beginning, that I was worthwhile, and if I was even, a man, or, all that stuff. And it certainly didn't feel like it, but the feelings came afterward, that I was worthwhile and all that stuff. But I think the thing about recovery too, which is interesting, is that it looks different on different people. There's no sort of like one way to do it. There's no like one size fits all or catch-all or anything like that. It certainly does take a bit of work. But the work isn't, it's not drudgery, it's interesting. It's friends, it's family. I did a little spirituality stuff. And that, I don't like to talk a lot about that because everybody does different things, but I think it can be useful if it's something that serves you. Creativity was good for me in my recovery, doing a lot of creative writing, and just for myself. It wasn't to be produced. And you don't have to be a writer. You can do a tap dance. You can make a macaroni necklace. You can make, it doesn't matter what you do as long as it makes you feel better. But it does take work. And the things that I put in place, you know, eating right, exercise, and kind of what you touched on, Max, is that and being realistic about it too. Because I was struggling to kind of find a new profession or something to augment or to complement the acting and work that I was doing at the time, because I needed to help people. I was like, if I need help, I need to help other people. It's just because what was going on in my head, I needed to feel responsible and worthwhile. And so it took a while. It's not like it came overnight that this profession is talking about suicide and going all around the world and giving speeches. It didn't happen overnight. It took a long time. And just being gentle about that, taking baby steps is important, because it was almost like learning to walk again. But it takes work. And the things that I put in place in my life, the exercise and the eating right, the spirituality, the creativity, things that I still have in my life and that I do to this day. And it's not like work, they're just good habits to sort of live in a worthwhile, self-fulfilling life.
Just as you're talking there, I'm thinking kind of a little more the kind of the harder side of things, like what would be a good milestone, you know, and the sense that as a man, I quite like to have things that motivate me, you know. So, you know, and the simple things that would be, okay, this week I'm going to go to a community centre one day this week and just look at the notice board.
Yeah.
You know, and see what happens there, or have a cup of tea in the cafeteria where, you know, I won't necessarily get into conversation, but that's what I'm going to do for this week, you know, and then that's your milestone. And it's because the external and the internal are kind of a part of this. Like when Josh was talking about professional health, that might be somebody who was going to help you change a little bit of behavior. So the behavior that inside says, well, I'm a failure. Everything I do is a failure, you know, and so my life is worthless. So, you know, a good practitioner at that point will say, well, could you look at this any differently? And so the little step for this week might be, okay, there is 5% possibility that I'm not a failure.
Yeah.
5%. Can I name something I did that didn't give me a sense of failure in the last week? Okay, I made a good meal for myself last week. I did. That's all. That's the milestone.
Yeah.
You know, so internal world, external world, and it's those little things that are the real bits. They're not like magic, changing a whole relationship, so finding a new partner, getting into new work because you've got financial worries, all bang, you're going to get the whole thing sorted in one. And, you know, it's kind of
practical
time, very kind of a little modesty that says, but takes us one step at a time away from the despair.
Yeah.
You know, and a sense of, okay, this is, and, you know, I want to touch on one little other thing here, you know, about Josh and I. We've come together through being bereaved by suicide. You know, you and I, we probably wouldn't have met unless this had happened. You know, to both our lives, and goodness me, we both miss our dad and my brother in a way. Even though it was a very long time for me, every day, and that quality of sadness never leaves me, and yet it doesn't now throw me into despair. It throws me into, you know, the kind of energy that Josh is putting into his life, and the kind of the energy and connection I feel with people that I put in, you know, that I like to do through the charity, the Conscious Aging Trust. Yeah, that's the way it works.
It's a scar, you know. It's a scar, and you touch a scar, and it's always going to be a little bit sore
and tender.
But it's something that it's sort of a reminder, you know, and we get to choose kind of what we do going forward.
And then we protect it a little bit from time to time.
Indeed, we do.
We do.
Yep.
We don't let it all hang out.
No,
everybody.
No,
we
not all the time.
No.
But there's a time and a place in that as well to do that.
I'll throw in my kind of my pitch for the charity, in that our focus is community. You know, you and I have formed a little community here. We're talking to you through this community of Hangout, and I find myself as an older man who not particularly used to the culture or the forms. You know, this being able to do it this way. It's not only the excitement that I get through being taken into this kind of conversation in a way that I'm not used to, but also the sense that this is just such an easy way for us to kind of build bridges across into other communities. And so the charity is working in the overall kind of our goal is improving practice and experience of all our aging, dying, carrying, and loss, because whatever age that may come, young or old. And it's been a privilege to hang out, and it's been also a privilege to kind of be able to name what I love to do in my life.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thanks, Max. Just before we kind of head off, I gotta say it because I would be remiss if I didn't. If you're going through because I'm sure everyone across cyberspace, the viewers, anyone, if you're going through what I was going through, depression, suicidal thoughts, even if there's just something you think you can't deal with, it doesn't even have to be that. Nip it in the bud, get help immediately before it can become prolonged depression, suicidal thoughts, or just anything that sort of festers. Because there's a good chance if I didn't get help the day I did, I might not be here right now. And this is a privilege, and it's an honor, and it's great to be here, and it's a gift, and I'm just so fortunate, and you matter, you're important, whether you believe that or not, because I certainly didn't at the time. You mean something to all of us, whether I ever get the chance to meet you or not. And the last thing, be a friend to those in need. Give a little extra. It's that space, and then you think, wow, I'm a friend to everybody. I got this covered. But it's in that little space you give the extra where abundance happens and where that you're able to kind of receive that when you need it. So just giving that little bit extra, because the extra that you give could be that little piece that saves a life. So I want to thank Max again, Men Beyond 50, Conscious Aging, Trust, and thank you all out there. International Men's Day 2014, November 19th. See you all hopefully very soon.
Goodbye.